My name is Brad Stoller, and I will be today's host. Ryan Keberle runs the Jazz Studies program at Hunter. He is an award-winning composer, trombonist, and band leader. Today, Ryan will be discussing the live music industry during the pandemic, focusing on how artists and presenters have been affected, how they've adapted, and the ways in which they've created during these very difficult times. And without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Ryan Keberle.
Thanks, Brad. Want to welcome our Hunter students. I see a few familiar faces and a few colleagues as well. So thanks for being here with us in Zoom. And then, of course, welcome the rest of you participating via YouTube Live. It's a pleasure to be here with you amidst this crazy summer and really this crazy last 6 months that, of course, everyone's lives have been upended and flipped upside down, but the live music industry in particular has been hard hit. In fact, it will most likely be one of the last industries to resume in any shape or form. People are saying that's really not going to happen until sometime in 2021. Major organizations, kind of the leaders of our fields, like the New York Philharmonic, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and many others have announced that they will not be programming any live music through the rest of this year. So, needless to say, times are extremely difficult. If artists are lucky enough to have savings, they've been dipping into those savings for quite some time. If venues are lucky enough to be able to pay their rent somehow, considering they're not making any money off of ticket sales or off of music programming, then they've been doing that for some time. So things are dire. Things do need individual support. Philanthropy of all kinds is highly encouraged, and I will definitely be touching on some things that you all, as music listeners, music fans, can do to help support this industry that is floundering right now. So, with all that being said, obviously that's kind of a negative way to kick things off, but I always try to find the bright side in things, and there have been some really extraordinary and creative outcomes from all of this, most of which have to do with utilizing technology in ways that had been used before, but maybe not to the same extent that they are now, or maybe completely new ways of utilizing technology to try and create. And it's not just about the creation, but also the sharing of what you create that is so difficult right now. A couple of other thoughts just in terms of where we're headed. One of the things that the scientists are saying is the most problematic when it comes to the spreading of this virus is singing. So, I don't know what that means for us down the road. Maybe we'll be seeing singers wearing face masks for some time. The science is still out on wind instruments. Lucky for me as a trombonist, there are some studies coming in that say brass instrument spread is really no more, no less than just your normal conversing or talking. But again, that science is very much brand new, and there's a lot more to be figured out. So, am trying to stay positive though, and what I wanted to do today in our very brief amount of time here is just try to share some of the things that I found to be uplifting, inspiring, both from an artistic standpoint, from a technologically kind of interesting standpoint, and also talk about, again, what you all can do to help support artists, presenters, and venues over the next 12 months. I think we really have about 12 more months of this in some shape or form that we're going to be dealing with it at least. So, one of the coolest things I've heard about recently, and of course things have changed. What we're doing now in August looks different from what we were doing in April and May, but there are still, even now, severe limitations as to what we can do. But one of the very cool things that I would love to see more of, at least during the warm winter months, is this idea of utilizing drive-in movie theaters as a possible performance venue. And we've seen some major rock and roll and country western groups present concerts in movie theaters for a fairly large audience, everyone sitting in their cars. And of course, that's not accessible for your average artist, but there is one presenter called the Troy Music Hall that has teamed up with a local movie theater up in Troy, New York. It's in upstate New York, presenting more local, more indie artists and combining them with movies, kind of highlighting certain themes in the movie and the music and looking to present them in the interesting ways. So I thought that was super cool. Um, I don't have any video of that. Most of the examples I'm going to share, though, I do have some kind of video, and I think that's probably the primary theme through all this is regardless of how people are sharing their music, it is being done so coinciding with video. And as a person who became a musician, who practices and what I practice because of my connection to sound, not to visual stimulation, I have a real love-hate relationship with video, and I always have. I think it's a very well-known fact that when we watch something, we hear less of that thing. And unfortunately, the youngest generation, those students currently in college and younger, are probably the worst listeners in the history of mankind, I hate to say. But in all seriousness, they've grown up with visual stimulation constantly. And I can only imagine how that would impact, I know how it impacts my ability to truly listen, not necessarily to hear, but to listen, that is to absorb and to become something different as a result of what you're listening to. So all that to say, all this video, it's great that we have the internet. It's great that we already have these platforms in place to share music and video, audio and video. But for me, that's been one of the drawbacks, and one of the things I've thought a lot about is how can we share music virtually without having to rely so much on the visual cues and stimulation that just kind of has been inherent so far. But one of the really cool things that has come as a result of this pandemic has been artists, both hugely famous and completely unknown, to be able to provide a glimpse to their fans and listeners into their own personal lives and behind the scenes, so to speak, whether that be behind the scenes of their music making process or behind the scenes in their personal lives. One of the very first examples of this that I came across that I want to share a bit of for you now was a series that Yo-Yo Ma has been doing for quite some time, just about every week since the pandemic started. Back in March, Yo-Yo Ma has been sharing just solo cello videos, very brief, but incredibly powerful videos. So I'm going to just share a bit of that now. I'll be sharing examples, but I'm going to keep them fairly brief. The idea is that tomorrow, same place, same time, we're going to dig deeper into the listening and the enjoyment of this music, both some of the things that I'm sharing with you now, and then also some things that I've been a part of over the last 6 months or so. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to keep these pretty brief. So this is Yo-Yo Ma. This, I think, was the very first thing he shared. Sharing it on Facebook, like many of these artists are doing. It's such a widely used platform, and the live video features are very easy to use and set up. So this is Yo-Yo Ma. hard to stop that incredible performance. But I love the intimacy of it. I mean, when would anyone get to hear Yo-Yo Ma perform something in such an intimate way? Literally, he's kind of sitting in his lap almost, in what looks like to be some room of his house. So similarly, but completely different as well, here's another very famous artist, John Legend, um, also sharing a very intimate performance. This was one of the very first things he did. Let me try to get that back in March. And
figured it out. All right.
oh, it's not liking the full screen. Let's try that one more time. One of the things that's interesting about John Legend's performance here
Now,
is he's
all
got his
right.
whole family
I
with
see
him.
you.
So again, this idea of kind of
As
digging
promised,
into
I am
the
pantsless.
personal
I have a
lives
robe
of some
on
of your favorite artists.
and no pants. I do have underwear on,
Pajama
in case
concert.
you're curious. So what songs do y'all want to hear?
So I'm going to fast forward a bit to him singing.
I think somebody requested this actually yesterday on my Twitter, and it's a good song to start with. It's by Stevie Wonder. It's called Love's in Need. Good morning or evening, friends. Here's your friendly announcer. I have serious news to pass on to everybody.
That's kind of cool. Now, what's interesting, this brings up one issue here that I have with some of these videos. For those pianists in the room, you probably noticed John Legend wasn't actually playing the piano there. He was lip syncing on the piano. And brings up an interesting question. When you're delivering your performance virtually, what doesn't stop people from highly producing, highly editing their performances prior to the fact? You kind of lose that spontaneity and you lose the realness, which I think is what makes live music so special. And what separates it from more of a recorded musical setting. So similarly, again, kind of a look into the personalized or having the opportunity to get to know some of your favorite artists on a more intimate level. I have a very good friend and colleague of mine named Camila Mesa, who has been sharing her music in both intimate settings and more formal settings on a website called Patreon. And if you're not familiar with Patreon, this is one of the ways that you can help support artists right now. Patreon is kind of an all-in-one website that allows artists to sell their music, videos, just about anything actually, anything that merchandise, anything that they can come up with, both directly to the fans, but also in a subscription form. So you subscribe for, say, $5 a month, $10 a month and up, and then you get all this inside access to your favorite artists' music and other aspects of their lives. So that's a super cool opportunity. I just wanted to play just a clip of one of Camila's kind of house performances that she did as a part of her Patreon account. I'm just going to share my screen here. Here we go. right, so just a bit of Camila as well. And one of the other cool things that the pandemic has kind of forced artists to do is to explore new ways to perform in a solo setting. And I think that for obvious reasons, even now as restrictions lift, most performances that you would see, even if there is a way for a group to perform, would be duos and trios. And of course, they'd all be standing 6 feet apart. We'll see some of that in just a second. But primarily, especially during the lockdown, all we had were solo performances. And so someone like Camila, who's so multi-talented, that was a no-brainer. It's something she already had been doing for a long time. And in that video, she had looped some of her own guitar chords and then was soloing on top of that loop. But for someone like myself, who's a trombonist, first and foremost, or by trade, it raised some interesting questions as to how I can create my music in ways that don't simply rely on one trombone. And so one of the things that I've been doing is experimenting, as you can see here, with some keyboard action and some effects and loops, and also doing some singing. Got myself a really good microphone for trombone and voice. So it's really forced us to get outside of our comfort zone. And of course, that's always a good thing. It will be interesting to kind of see how, once things do begin to reopen, how those new skill sets are utilized and taken advantage of by artists. So let's see here. Moving on, another very cool thing that I have been lucky enough to be a part of is the pandemic has forced artists to kind of become even more of a DIY, take the initiative mindset. And one of the things in March, April, and May that we had virtually none of were presenters, because there was nowhere to present music. And so artists, especially artists who were already fairly adept at performing online in a virtual setting, got together and created a organization called Live from Our Living Room. And they presented a number of online music festivals, so to speak. One just last month featured over, I believe, 200 artists performing in solo and duo settings, workshops, Q&A sessions. It was pretty incredible. And also because all these artists are able to do this from the confines of their home, they were able to get some really kind of legendary jazz musicians to take part, people like Kurt Rosenwinkel, people like Chick Corea. So that was a super cool result of artists having a little bit more time on their hands or feeling a bit more charitable with their time. So let's see here. So something else that's been interesting to watch are seeing how certain venues who already were streaming live responded in this pandemic age. One such venue in my world, the jazz world, was Smalls Jazz Club. And Smalls has been live streaming their music with very high def audio and decent video for many years now. In fact, their archive, I believe, is into the thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of performances now of jazz groups over the years. And so when New York City was finally able to open up slightly, this would have been back in June, Smalls started presenting groups in a socially distanced setting on their stage with no audience, and then live streaming those performances. And I wanted to just kind of briefly play a clip from one of those performances. And this just happens to feature one of our professors, who I believe is with us right now on Zoom. And that is the great jazz pianist and composer John Chin. And this is something that this is a performance he led just a week ago at Smalls, and you can get a sense of what that might have been like. No audience, and just the three musicians all in masks and socially distanced, but performing together. And I can say, for me personally, and I know most of my peers feel this way, the hardest part of all this has been not getting to make music with other human beings in the same room, because you can try all you want, but making music virtually over the internet it doesn't even come close to allowing you to get into the kind of personal connection, musical connections that you can do when you're in the same room with those musicians. So I can imagine this must have been pretty refreshing for John. So here's just a clip of that performance. the John Shin Trio. I'm going to stop it there. We'll listen to some more of that tomorrow. Incredible. I'm sure must have been so weird performing in that space with no people, because usually that space is absolutely packed with people, shoulder to shoulder. You'll notice at the bottom of that live stream, though, there was a website that said Smalls Live Foundation. And the owner of Smalls is an incredibly just brilliant musician and businessman who is trying to find ways to pay his rent in the tens of thousands each month without having a business to run, essentially, without being able to sell tickets. And so one of the things he's doing is taking donations via this foundation he set up, a nonprofit. So of course it's tax deductible for the donors. And that's really become kind of the name of the game. I think if you look around and you see the presenters who are still presenting, they're almost all funded privately. One of the reasons for that is there's been virtually zero support from local and state and federal governments, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon, unfortunately. Of course, arts have been so under-supported for many, many years, chronically so, and I don't think having billions of dollars in debt is going to be a good impetus for that to change. One can hope, but instead, private donors have been stepping up. One of the other cool things that Smalls Jazz Club has done is actually allowed for individuals to literally sponsor a performance by their favorite jazz artists. So if there's an artist you love who lives in New York City, you can reach out to Spike. He's easy to find on Facebook or on his website and say, hey, I want to pay for so-and-so artist to bring their band into Smalls and perform. So that, I think, is a really, really cool idea. I hope to see more of that. I don't know of many other examples of that particular model at the moment, but I think that's a more sustainable model because it takes the pressure off of having to track down and fight over those same grants that just about every presenter and venue is currently after. So moving right along. And those of you in Zoom can see John Shin just chimed in. He said, hello, yes, it was just what the doctor ordered. Literally and figuratively, yeah, I can only imagine. It's something that I've only gotten to do in very limited amounts and nothing very creatively fulfilling like playing with a jazz trio. So I'm very envious. So some venues, some presenters, bigger presenters are getting creative with their programming. This is Cal Performances, which of course is a major presenter on the West Coast. And I'm going to share my screen here so you can see what I'm seeing. Cal Performances has started presenting music videos. So of course, this is not a business model that they would have been utilizing prior to the pandemic, but now in the absence of live music, they're presenting music videos. And in some cases, these music videos were made specifically for them. So there's a certain level of originality, and some of these videos are being debuted for the first time by Cal Performances. Here's Timo Andres, a really wonderful classical composer, performing solo piano and some other pieces that I believe were not made specifically for this, but they're still presenting on their website. So, and I'm assuming these artists would be paid. Cal Performances is a large enough organization that they would be raising money from private and public sponsors, and so hopefully some of that would go towards these artists that they're presenting. But I thought that was an interesting idea. A couple of other larger presenters I wanted to touch on. One is Jazz at Lincoln Center, and again I'll share my screen here. And Jazz at Lincoln Center, prior to the pandemic, was presenting anywhere from 4 to 8 performances every single night on their campus. They had 3 different venues, thousands of listeners every single night. So you can imagine just the hit that this pandemic, the shutdown, would have had on such a huge organization. But what's really amazing from my perspective is their ability to kind of bounce back. And of course, most of this are virtual performances and workshops. They are going to start presenting live music in their jazz club, much like Smalls is doing, with no audience, from what I hear. But in the meantime, they're still presenting. Look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4 events just on Tuesday alone. So kind of cool to see. And again, I'm assuming some money is going towards to support the artists that are involved here. So that's really great to see large organizations kind of stepping up to the plate. Wynton Marsalis, who is the leader of Jazz at Lincoln Center organization, he was also for a time doing something on Facebook Live called Skeins Domain, which again, this idea of gaining kind of the interior access to artists' lives was really cool. This particular one that I wanted to just play a bit from was him hanging in his house, chatting with none other than Chick Corea and Dee Dee Bridgewater.
You ever told. So when I was growing up,
For some reason, Zoom does not like it when I go to large full screen. Let's try that again.
Oh, so that's 2 of my cold ones, Dee Dee. What you think about that?
Oh, I think, okay. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens when we are young and we don't know. And you were getting the words of someone with wisdom and experience. So, but I can't really pull anything up of my own stuff. Wait a minute. I just got a girlfriend that called in. I'm sorry. I can't pull anything up right now because that's kind of cold.
They're telling stories.
What did it make you feel like?
Did you know Betty Carter?
Chick Corea's got a great one coming up.
Did you know Betty Carter?
I knew Betty Carter. I was Betty Carter's puppy dog. I used to follow Betty Carter everywhere. So I didn't experience Betty like a lot of other people did. Betty kind of let me into her inner circles, but she would never allow me to come to any of her rehearsals. So she would always let me know where she was playing in New York when I first moved to New York, and I would always reserve a seat at a table by myself, and I would just sit and I would just drink her in. I do remember one time we were performing in Brussels, and it was a concert where she was doing a duet with Abby Lincoln. So it was she and Abby for one half of the show, and then me for the other half. And we were on an intermission break between the 2 shows, and we were standing backstage, and I said, Betty, I said, you know, you did this duet album with Carmen, and I said, now you're doing these shows with Abby. And she said, in true Betty fashion, with verbiage that we cannot use, she said, don't ask me, and I won't have to hurt your feelings.
Ouch.
And I said, okay, Betty, I won't ask you. She
Can I
said,
tell
thank you. Let's talk about something else. And that was it.
I got an opposite story. I got an
What?
opposite kind of story, but it's a very cool story. So when talking about our heroes, I remember after I played with Mongo Santa Maria's band in 1960, I think, 1960.
Wow.
Was my first gig with a name band in New York, and it was thrilling, you know. And then after I worked, the timbali player on Mongo's band at that time was Willie Bobo. You remember Willie Bobo?
Yes, I remember Willie.
Yeah,
Dance.
Yeah.
Willie Bobo could dance.
Yeah.
His real last name is Correa, same as mine, except with 2 R's. He's from Puerto Rico. So anyway, Willie formed a band after Mongo's band, and because he wanted to play jazz drums. He wanted to be a jazz drummer. So he took me out of the band. Larry, who played with Monk,
Gales.
I don't know.
Larry Gales. Larry Gales was the bass player. Joe Farrell was the tenor player. I think Marty Scheller was the trumpet player, and we had this quintet. So we played at Birdland. We got a Birdland gig, and so after one of the nights at Birdland, you know, I'm so new in New York, and I'm trying to find my footing. I don't know, am I doing good or not doing good? I'm enjoying the excitement of it, and it's after the night, after the 2 sets or 3 sets, however long we played, and I'm at the bar nursing a drink. I think I was the last guy there, and I see down at the other end of the bar, some guy starts walking toward me, and I recognized him when he came halfway. It was Tommy Flanagan, who was one of my heroes, my Hawaiian piano heroes. So Tommy comes up to me, and all he did was he kind of pointed at me, and he said, "Man, you got some fresh ideas." And he turned around and he walked away. And
That was it?
I was on a cloud for 2 weeks. That's the kind of thing that kept me going in New York.
Anyways, I thought that's a great story. Winton had started off telling one of his classic get your butt kicked stories he's fond of, and then Chick follows it up with the most positive story ever. And I guess my point here being, these are the kind of stories that typically the only people who would get to hear them would be other musicians hanging backstage, hanging on the tour bus. You know, these kinds of stories are one of the things that make being a jazz musician so much fun, especially when you're performing with older musicians who have this history and these experiences with the legends of our art form. And so now, because of the pandemic, we were getting to literally just sit in like a fly on a wall and hear these legendary musicians just kind of shoot the shit, so to speak. So that was very, very cool, I thought. All right, so moving on. Let's see, what else do I have in store for us? Something else that I thought was interesting. There's a wonderful producer of modern opera and modern kind of musical theater performances called Beth Morrison Presents. And I'm in an ensemble led by the great composer Darcy James Argue, who has collaborated with Beth Morrison on 2 occasions. The first multimedia event was called Brooklyn Babylon, and the second was called Real Enemies. And these were performances done at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and full costume, lighting. In the case of Brooklyn Babylon, there was even live art, live painting going on, and slide projections. Really just incredibly involved and moving multimedia event. And that has never been seen outside of live performance setting. And we performed there. We performed in a few other locations like Amsterdam and somewhere on the West Coast. I forget where. But lo and behold, I didn't even realize this at the time. The performance had been videotaped with super high quality, high def videos. We They also had recorded the performance. Of course, we also had made a CD, an audio recording. So I think they may have borrowed audio from that as well. And they debuted this performance online last month. This would have been the very first time this performance could be seen online in a virtual setting throughout the world. So I thought it could be fun just to watch just a clip of that. Actually, this clip I'm going to share is the trailer from that piece, but kind of give you a sense of what people got to see last month and something I was involved in. And tomorrow we'll do some more in-depth listening to a lot of the music that I'm sharing with you, and some other stuff that I'm probably not going to get to as well. We'll focus more on the music. Here we go. This here is what you would have seen when they presented it virtually. Just a glimpse. So yeah, again, this live video footage is what they presented, that what they premiered actually online last month. And so they had kind of been sitting on this archival footage all this time, and then obviously we're probably able to raise some money, or I think they were charging a subscription fee for people to watch it. So just a way for them to raise a bit of money during this very difficult time. So that was also kind of interesting to see. Let's see here, what's up next? Similarly, this is another great presenter nonprofit organization called National Sawdust. And again, this is a venue they're used to presenting live music. That's what they do. And so during the pandemic, they started presenting live solo and duo performances from people's homes. And they've got really incredible series. In fact, the series continues through the end of the summer season. So highly encourage you to check it out. It's National Sawdust. I was going to play just a clip from one of my favorite guitarists of my generation named Julian Lage. And here he is sitting in his home, I'm guessing out in California where he's from. And again, it's just the intimacy we get to hear this virtuoso musician just perform for us in such a casual setting. It's really kind of a special opportunity here. So here's Julian Lage.
We'll see where we land. Thank you all so much.
incredible musician, total guitar virtuoso. So where does that leave us? I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. Those of you on YouTube Live, please, you can enter your question in the comments section, and on those of you on Zoom, feel free to enter your questions into the chat feature of Zoom. Right, so where does that leave us? I mentioned all these really kind of fun, extraordinary, inspiring things that have come as a result of the pandemic, including, actually, I want to finish, before I move on, I want to finish with one, including kind of forcing brilliant artists, again, outside their comfort zone, or maybe just forcing them to think differently. And one such artist, someone who I've had the great pleasure to work with for many years, is the multi-instrumentalist Scott Robinson. Scott Robinson famously plays everything. In fact, we were on a gig with the Maria Schneider Orchestra a few years back in Tokyo, and she said this as she introduced him on the stage. And she said, he plays everything except the paycheck, because we had just been paid. It was our last night. And lo and behold, Scott Robinson stands up to take his solo of the night, and he pulls out the paycheck and starts playing it like you do a grass reed, and took 2 choruses of the blues on his paycheck. So this man is just a pure music, a total genius of spontaneous, creative music making, and he plays everything. And so this pandemic, because he has no one else to play with, has kind of forced him to think creatively in ways that he can create music on his own. And he last month presented a live performance of sorts on the Mingus Facebook page, because Scott is part of the Mingus Big Band organization. And Scott created, it wasn't a live performance, it's something he created in his music studio beforehand, using overdub technology. But he created what I think is one of the most inspiring performances of Mingus music that I've seen in quite some time. And I want to just share a bit of it for you guys here. Oh, you know what? I think I already have it queued up. Yeah, I do. All right, awesome. So share screen. Here we go. So this is Scott Robinson.
Thank you very much for being here for our Mingus Mondays show. Please stick around right after the music for the question and answer session. Appreciate you being here. And now I'm going to do something I've wanted to try for a very long time.
If you look closely, you get just a sample of the instruments he plays and owns. Oh! Stop it there. It's incredibly inspiring music making there. Shared virtually, shared through the screen, through the speakers. And that's really, I think, kind of my final thought before we take questions is, where does that leave us? Obviously, there have been some fun things to watch, but we're watching it primarily. And when we're listening through these little speakers on our computers, if we're lucky enough to have a great stereo system or a good set of headphones, sure, it sounds better. But it's never the same as being in the room with that music. Music is literally sound waves moving through space. And when those sound waves hit your body, they move the molecules in your body, not just in your ears, but your entire body is moved by those vibrations. And I'm a firm believer as to that being the reason music is so powerful, is its ability to literally vibrate our physical bodies. And we'll never get that through recorded music. Now, traditionally, recorded music offered us something different. It offered us the ability to hear music with an extremely sophisticated mix and EQ of the music, and getting to hear it exactly how the composer or the artist intended for us to hear that music, something that you don't get to do in a live performance. But I find that so many of these virtual performances do neither of those things. We don't get the live experience, and they also sound kind of crappy because of the speakers are coming through or because of the microphones they're using. A lot of these performances, people are just using their iPhones and using the microphone on their iPhone, which is not horrible. I mean, we're lucky enough to have the technology we do now. Imagine what these performances would have sounded like if this happened in 2012. It would have been pretty rough. So that's one thing that for me, I'm still thinking a lot about. I also just hate the fact that how much further dependent this has made us all on visuals. And I hope that there is perhaps a realization of what's happening culturally, throughout society, and we start thinking about ways to counteract that in schools and with our people of a younger age who are still able to develop those listening skills. And then the other big thing for me, I mentioned earlier, was just the lack of group performances. Even now, yeah, you might see a duo or trio performing in a club with small or no audiences, but you're not going to get to see any big band performances. You're not going to get to see any large ensemble performances. That to me is such a shame. The orchestra performances just missing all of this. And I think the thing that I keep coming back to, and I keep coming back to this on many different levels and different facets of my life, with my students, with my family, is that this is temporary. I mean, it's certainly it's a long pause, but it is temporary. There will be a time in the future when we can get back to making music. And so for me, my attitude has been, this is really about just sustaining ourselves personally, health-wise, family-wise, emotionally, and just trying to be ready for when things open up. I remember thinking when the pandemic first hit, wow, I'm going to have all this free time. I'm going to be composing new music constantly, going to be creating so much stuff, and I really haven't. And I think a lot of my peers are in a similar boat, and that's for numerous reasons. But there's no hurry, and why try to create when what you can create is so limited, given the restrictions that we're living with. So the other big thing, of course, is the financial impact. And I mentioned that there are things you can do. Again, Patreon. Check out Patreon. It's Patreon. And you'd be surprised how many artists are on there now. Many, many artists have moved to Patreon as a source of income. Essentially, it's a way for them to sell things without having to create a record, which, of course, is an extremely expensive endeavor. It's also a way to create some recurring revenue in the form of subscriptions. So check out Patreon. The other thing, if you hear music you like, you can be assured that those artists are not making any money on that music. First and foremost, because most of the ways we listen to music nowadays pay nothing. Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, they pay nothing. People might tell you otherwise. Oh, they pay a fraction of a cent. No, it's nothing. For indie artists, there's no money to be made. You could get 1 million views on YouTube and you might make $1,000. Whoop-de-doo. So when you hear music you like, those artists, those musicians are not making money. So search them out. Go to their websites. Find ways to support them. Go to Bandcamp. It's another great music platform where you can actually purchase the music from the artists directly. So that's really the most important theme. Long-term projections, again, this is temporary. We'll come back, and we just got to hope that we and our governments do enough to prevent artists from stopping making art, to prevent venues from closing, to prevent presenters from losing their funding. And that's a big ask, but it's really on us individually right now as our government is pretty much worthless when it comes to those things. So with all that being said, I hope you guys join me again tomorrow. We're going to do a lot more listening to this music and also listen to some things that I've been a part of. I have been doing some recording. I mentioned I got the good microphone, some video, movie making with friends, and other various projects of sorts. So we'll get into a bit of that tomorrow. But I'd like to leave the last 10, 15 minutes now for questions. Oh, here we go. Can you talk a little bit about the direction your compositions have taken since the pandemic? Did you finish things that you had started in February or change direction? That's a great question. As I mentioned, I really haven't done much composing, but what I did do was return to some older projects and look to find ways to adapt those to our current environment. So once I got this microphone that I'm really just loving on the trombone and for voice, I started doing some overdubbing, and I've got some music that I wrote many years ago for brass quartet. I thought it could be fun to record that as just myself playing and overdubbing 4 parts of myself playing that music. And so that was something I thought I'd share tomorrow during our listening session. And then I did start making a video, like so many people are doing now, to share online. And ironically, you had asked if there was anything that I hadn't finished that I tried to finish now, but the opposite has happened. I actually haven't finished some of the projects that I started during this pandemic. I just find it. I'm sure many of you can relate. I work under deadlines. I work when there's a reason to create. That isn't to say I'm not creating. I'm practicing more now than I ever have in my entire adult life. But you know, my first gig is in March 2021. I was supposed to be in Japan on tour last month, in Europe on tour. I was supposed to be at the Newport Jazz Festival last week, and it's all canceled and canceled through March. And even that gig I have with one of my groups in March, we're building a tour down in the Carolinas, feels kind of presumptuous to be doing that. So all that to say, there's not a whole lot of motivation for me personally right now without the gigs. And for me, performing online, making videos just does not cut it. I spent way too many years enjoying the beauty of making music for live audience with live humans. To anything else is just not worth it for me. There are other things I enjoy doing that I've also really been able to find the time to do now. So here's another question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on lip syncing, pre-recording, editing, producing, backtracking, writing virtual performances. Well, you can tell the thing I ended with, the Scott Robinson performance, was just that. It was something he pre-recorded, highly edited, both visually and audio-wise. And for me, that was like one of the greatest things I've heard during this pandemic. So I have no problem with it, especially if it means getting to hear things in a higher level of sonic quality. Then I'm all for it. Now, when it comes to that John Legend performance where he's so supposedly performing in his pajamas from his living room and then starts to play the piano, and it's obvious to any piano player he's not actually playing, just playing along with the recording, to me that was pretty off-putting. And I'm sure there's a bit of that. But I think by and large, it's been pretty real. And that's one of the things, as I mentioned, that's been kind of nice during this time, is to get that more intimate, that more raw experience from the artists. I think so. Yeah, Brad, any questions? Anyone on Zoom who wants to ask a question? It looks like there was one that had been typed in. Oh, here we go. Yeah. John.
Hello. My question actually is historical, and I don't know if you have any insight on any of this, but I was wondering how musicians in the past, and I typed this question out, you know, if there's precedent during maybe the Spanish flu or during the Great Depression, and how musicians were able to adjust, factoring the economic conditions during those times. I know that in doing some of my work teaching jazz history last semester, that there were a number of musicians that took day jobs, and I think I saw that Sidney Bechet had taken a job as a cleaner, a clothing cleaner, maybe dry cleaner, if that
Crazy.
or something along those lines, and that kind of thing. But outside of that, I really don't know what and how musicians have sort of dealt with this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I did when this all first started going down. I'm a real history buff. I did an enormous amount of Googling on the Spanish flu, and it's incredible how little information there is. I'm sure there is information out there in books and whatnot, but in terms of just like easily accessible information, it's almost like they buried that history, and they just wanted to pretend it never happened. So it's really hard to say, but that was right, as that was right in the middle of kind of the beginning of jazz. But at the same time, I'm thinking out loud here now. The first great jazz recordings weren't made until 1923, whereas the original Dixieland Jazz Band recorded in 1917. Now, for non-history fans out there, jazz history fans, that original Dixieland Jazz Band recording in 1917 was not very good. I just kind of, I don't know, it's not even really jazz. There's no improv. But I always wondered why there was 6 years between. That's a long time for the very first jazz recording to be made, which became very famous, and then for none of the really kind of cutting edge jazz musicians to have made any music, recorded any music for 6 more years. So I'm guessing that Spanish flu must have had something to do with that delay, because it happens right in the middle of that time. But I don't know. I do know from the Great Depression, though, that like so many other facets of our country during that time, there was enormous support for the arts. And this idea of government supporting artistic ventures, I think that was one of the first times the U.S. government had really started to pay for art making. And it wasn't like, oh, they're just giving artists carte blanche to create art. They were paying people to draw murals for their new buildings and to create sculptures for public works. But I do know that kind of helped set a precedent for our country and our federal government in their support of the arts. So obviously we're in a very different time now and under very different leadership. But yeah, it's possible. It has happened.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. Fingers crossed. So it looks like there's another question from YouTube. Are you able to collaborate with Catharsis members? Are they coping well, active musically? That's interesting. Not really, but one of the things I wanted to do and I started doing a bit of was collectively composing. I was thinking about, well, how can we use this to our advantage? And something that we love to do in Catharsis is to compose in an improvised setting on stage in real time. So one of us will come up with an idea, the next person will jump in and create some counter idea. And so I thought, well, we could actually do that virtually if I create an idea and then I email that recording to another band member, and then they kind of add to that and develop that idea and then send it back to me or send it to another. So I did a bit of that with my bassist, Jorge Roeder. But again, we didn't finish anything. We came up with some pretty cool ideas. I will eventually return to what we did, but nothing complete. So and I mentioned Camila. Camila's doing very well. She had years and years of experience performing in a solo setting. She's also a multi-instrumentalist. So she's got the guitar and the voice, so very much self-sustained. So she's doing really well. She's living in Wyoming with her boyfriend of many years, and I think just loving the outdoors. And she's got this Patreon account that hopefully is bringing in a bit of income for her. My drummer, Eric Dube, I've spoken to a number of times, but I don't think he's been able to create much. His studio was in New York, so for the first few months he had left the city and wasn't able to get to his studio. And even now, there's not a whole lot a drummer can do. They're so immobile. It's not like they can just go perform on a street corner without drastically changing what it is they do. And I mentioned Scott, though. Scott's doing okay. Scott's one of those people, though, who has literally spent 50 years of his life playing music every single night with humans. So for as difficult as it's been for me, I can only imagine for someone like Scott, who has literally spent his entire life, and Scott's in his late 50s now, so many, many more years than me. And he's also much more active than I am as a performer. He's playing every single night with other jazz musicians. And so all of that just came to a screeching halt for him. I know it was pretty rough at first, but as you saw in that video, he's definitely making the most of it. Scott's also working on a one-man symphony where he's overdubbing, improvising everything and overdubbing all these parts and all these instruments. And he's up to, I think he said, about 10 minutes with over 200 tracks and something like 60 instruments. But he's got another 40 minutes to go. And so by his estimation, he's going to be done around the year 2032. So he's getting a lot of work done on that. But yeah, it's definitely a time for us to reflect, a time for us to support one another, and anything you guys, all you guys out there can do to support artists, to support. If there are venues that you used to go to those venues' websites, because they most likely have donation systems in place for you to just simply give some money. And, you know, the littlest bit of money will make all the difference, because most of these venues have nothing coming in right now. Any other questions, Brad, from our Zoom participants?
If there are any questions coming in from Zoom, you could raise your hands right now. We'll give it a few seconds. I don't see anything. So in closing, are we ready for that, Ryan?
Yeah, let's wrap things up.
Okay. I'd just like to thank you for such a thorough and informative presentation, and personal and entertaining. And thank you to all in attendance. And please come to our next Music, Tea, and Talk event, which is on Tuesday, August 25th, which is an event organized by the Anti-Racism and Music Reading Group. The discussion will center around the book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, by Robin DiAngelo.